My name is Reed. I am an artist, a musician. I also do a bunch of things, um, construction, landscaping, woodworking, etc. Um, Recently, just started working in film, actually, in the uh, art art department. I'm from Illinois. It was a fairly small town. Um, Kind of tucked away in the woods amongst a bunch of lakes. It used to be kind of a vacation or weekend place for people from Chicago. They would go boating and camping and fishing. But that was in its heyday, I think, in the 20s and through 50s or something like that. So it was kind of washed up and kind of just became a podunky little town. Um, about 10,000 people. I lived there from when I was born until I was 14. I actually, my parents are divorced, and I actually moved in with my dad when I was 14, and he lived in a different town, so it was a little closer to Chicago, but just another suburb. Yeah, it was, I mean, like I said, it was closer to the city. It was a little more urban, sort of surrounded by a lot more slightly larger towns. Um, it was mostly it was kind of a weird spot. I went to high school there with um, really rich kids, middle class kids, and like also kids that were in a housing project. So there was a little ghetto next to the school, a couple of little ghettos around there, and then, like I said, middle class, suburban, and then there was the really rich neighborhood. They all went to the same high school. It was an interesting dynamic, um, and it was my first real lasting experience with anything outside of the small podunky town I was in before. I lived there until I was 17, and that was when I moved to New Mexico for the first time. Um, and I finished out high school in Las Cruces, New Mexico, and was there for a total of 4 years. And that was a that was an amazing experience. Just being way outside of my culture zone. Um, and it was kind of my crazy coming of age time. And that was when I started playing music and skateboarding, and just kind of was introduced to all these things that I knew was there, but never really was inspired to do before. I right away I just kind of like gravitated to toward the like stoner kids, and they had all these cool hobbies though, they weren't just like smoking weed and playing video games all the time. They were musicians and skateboarders, and you hang around stuff long enough and eventually you join in because you're like, well, I'm just sitting on the sidelines. So I started skating and kind of meeting a bunch of people through that, and they were a few of my friends were already experienced musicians and were in bands and stuff, and I didn't really know much about music, but I had you know, I had a definite interest in music, and I was learning about all these different styles and um, artists that I've never heard before that were kind of like obscure stuff, kind of different, a different sound than what I was used to. And eventually that inspired me to like I wanted to I wanted to write songs and I wanted to play the drums and so on and so forth. So the skateboarding didn't really stick with me for too long, but the music became a huge part of my life. So that was definitely a life changing experience. Well, actually, it was the other way around. I have been drawing. I guess since every kid starts drawing, usually, I mean that I've every kid I've met, starts at least drawing with crayons or something like that when they're about one or two. And my family really encouraged me. They were, my sister was an artist. She actually ended up going to the art institute. But I don't know, they encouraged me. They were just like, "Oh, you're so great at drawing. You should just keep doing it and keep doing it." And over time, that just became part of how I identified myself. And kids at school would be like, "Can you draw me that cool dragon thing or this or that?" And it just kind of became. I identified with that when I was very young, and I got into comic books pretty heavily and video games and just the characters and the artwork with that really got me inspired, and I was going to be a comic book artist. That was my thing I wanted to be when I grew up. And then I thought, well, or maybe a video game designer or something like that. um and then in high school I kind of got more into just kind of, quote unquote fine art. um just kind of creating pieces and expressing myself through that. And took every class I could in high school. Every or pretty much every class they offered on art. Didn't go to college, but um, when I was about 21, I sold my first painting. It was something I had done in high school. And so from there, I was like, oh, maybe I could make this a career. So that's always been kind of going on in the background, even before the music. My parents got divorced when I was pretty much a newborn. So I have no memory of them ever being together. But that being said, my parents have been split up my whole life, and they both are remarried now. I mostly lived with my mom and stepdad up until I was 14, and I would visit with my dad every other weekend. In a lot of ways, I pretty much had the typical American middle class upbringing. We had, decent schools, and we always had a roof over our heads, always had food and all that. Watched a lot of TV. I was a little bit of a troublemaker. I was always in trouble at school. I was always in trouble at home. Um, ever since kindergarten, pretty much, I've been getting in trouble, just getting into it with other kids, bothering other kids, supposedly being rambunctious, typical kid stuff, but obviously not the things they like you to do in kindergarten. So I was always in trouble. I was always in the corner or whatever. One time I got sent outside. That still puzzles me because there, for some reason, this classroom had a door going directly outside, and the teacher got so pissed she locked me outside. I don't know. I was like 5, so it probably felt like an hour, but it was probably like 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something. But I don't think I wandered too far, but it just kind of dilly dallied around outside. Later on, I was kind of the class clown and got into even more trouble as I got older. In my 8th grade year, I was grounded for 8 months for smoking a cigarette at school. One of the neighbors around the school called the school, so we got caught. It was a weird dynamic at school. I was never really one of the cool kids, but I was never really one of the nerds or whatever. I was just kind of a loose cannon. I hung out with who I thought were like the cool kids and the troublemakers and all that, but I don't feel like they really ever accepted me into their group completely. But either way, we were always getting in trouble together. Um, Stealing the chromies off the teacher's car tires, and chromies are those little tire caps. I let air out of the bus tire with a little tire gauge and just stupid stuff. I don't know what. I think we were maybe just bored and rambunctious. We were stuck in a school where they made us be quiet and sit still, and you know, kids don't want to do any of that. Um, I was always in trouble. I didn't get along with my stepdad too well at the time. It had nothing to do with the divorce, I don't think. It was just, he was very strict and neat and orderly, and I was very wild and unpredictable, always pushing the limits of what you could get away with. But I was always, I was never like a real bad kid because I never was allowed to do anything. And I was always in trouble all the time already. So I never got into any real trouble. Like some kids were getting busted by the cops and doing drugs and all this stuff, drinking and at a young age, going to juvie and stuff. I don't know. I never was, my parents just, these were kids that had, their parents didn't pay attention to what they were doing. My parents were on top of me all the time. When I was 14, I moved in with my dad, and I was at that point. I never got in trouble in school anymore. I just got in trouble with my parents, mostly for smoking pot, not getting good grades and stuff, sneaking out at night, stuff like that. Just go hang out with my friends and play video games, smoke weed. One time I got busted doing acid when I was like 15. That was freaky, getting yelled at while you're on acid. So, yeah, and then, I mean, back to childhood. I, like I said, I never really fit in with the kids. And then, I played with the neighbor kids or whatever, but I spent a lot of time playing just by myself. And I was just off in my own little world. And I was pretending to be my different comic book characters and robots and superheroes and soldiers and so on and so forth, ninjas. So I pretty much entertained myself by running around outside, waving sticks around and messing with everything. No, it was, no. Kids were into sports and video games. That was pretty much it. I mean, I think some of the kids thought it was cool that I could draw pictures and stuff, but and they would, some of the kids would, when I was younger, some of the kids would play make believe games with me. That was about as artistic as they got, but um I was very active. I was always riding my bike, rolling down hills on our skateboards, trying to push each other off, and um, playing sports. I never really was on a team in team sports, but we would just run around and play basketball and baseball and in our own way, my friends and I. Hockey. Lived on a lake growing up, so I went fishing and hiking a lot. You could walk across the lake in the wintertime. Used to go snowmobiling with my stepdad. My dad, my real dad, as we said back then, would also take me out doing stuff, and we would go canoeing and shooting at the rifle range and doing archery, camping, bike riding. It was a weird town I grew up in. I mean, looking back where I'm at now, this place is dirt poor, and these kids have not a lot of opportunities for education at a young age. And the the average income where I grew up was actually not bad, but it was at risk of sounding politically incorrect. It was kind of a trashy biker bar town that I grew up in a way. I mean, it was a lot of kids around there, their parents drank and smoked in the house and probably did some drugs and things, and their kids just kind of ran around outside and did whatever they wanted, got into drugs and violence and all this stuff, and it was rough. It was like I was kind of at risk of getting beaten up a lot. um I always kind of managed not to get beat up too bad, but I was definitely a target for the other kids. I was different, I was really intelligent. I was into reading books about physics, and I was into comic books and art, and um, I was always trying to be funny in class. I always, I think I always tried to be everyone's friend, but a lot of the kids, I think, were just annoyed by me. I was, I was very rambunctious. When I moved in with my dad when I was 14, my friends, quote unquote, that I started hanging out with at that time, they were in a different town, different culture, maybe even. They treated me kind of like shit when I first met them, and they said that I was a dick and that I was moody all the time and I was very pushy, always trying to tell people what to do or and just that I was moody and rude to people. I didn't really ever notice it before that. But who knows, maybe I was, and that was why the kids picked on me. No one likes a cocky little no one likes a cocky little bastard. Especially like all the girls liked me in school. So I think that pissed off the boys. Um but yeah, no one likes a cocky little prick, and I think I wasn't a heartless bastard. I think I was a generally a nice kid, but like I said, I just was rambunctious and I was always trying to get a rise out of everyone. Yeah, a lot of my friends were getting busted all the time. Um, and some of my friends from earlier on, like from middle school and elementary school, kids that I grew up with ended up going to jail and getting back out again and robbing liquor stores or whatever the hell. I don't know. They were just dumb kids. I mean, probably doing drugs and partying. Some of the kids that you would have thought were going to be losers though, like actually ended up being like teachers and having families, nice people. And all the nerdy kids, forget about it. They all were super successful and became doctors and lawyers and had degrees and all that. So, like I said, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a privileged place to grow up, but, it was white America, as they say. Literally, because, I mean, there was no diversity. I think there was an element of racism there. I didn't really notice it. And if I was a part of it, I didn't notice. Um, I mean, it wasn't outwardly, talked about much, but, you know, kids would say, I'm sure they learned it from their dads or whatever, their parents, but, kids would say niggers and spics and all that. And it was just, I guess I never really thought about it as racist. I just thought about it as swearing, like, because we always tried to say everything as horribly as possible if there were no adults around. It was like a fuck you, you faggot, and it was like, we never actually sat there and thought about, like, oh, am I against gay people? It's like, oh, yeah, well, you're supposed to tell the other kids that you are, but I, you know, but I wasn't really raised that way. My parents were hippies, supposedly back in the 70s, 60s, 70s. Uh, you know, I think I was, and my sisters were very progressive people. They were much older than me. They were always teaching me things, telling me the ways of the world. My sisters played a big part in my upbringing as well because they were 10 and 12 years older than me. They watched me and changed my diapers and encouraged me to draw and learn math and learn to write at a young age. My parents, I was always raised not. I was always raised that everyone was equal, uh, men, women, black, white, Mexican, all that, um, and that it wasn't right to say anything politically incorrect or wasn't polite to say. I remember one time we were driving down the road and I saw a guy in a turban and I didn't know anything about. I wasn't very worldly at the time. And I said, "Look, Mom, a Jew." And my mom goes, "Don't say that. It's not polite to say." And it's like the guy couldn't hear me or anything. It wasn't polite to say. The guy was not a Jew, I don't think. But, you know, and I possibly didn't even realize it at the time, but we have, my mom and sisters and I have Jewish blood pumping in our veins. We just never, my family separated. My grandmother separated herself from that before I was born, so weren't we weren't Jewish ever in the sense of that was our religion. She just didn't buy into any of that. We had a Christmas tree at Christmas time, and she wanted to be, I guess, a typical. She wanted to be. I'm sure it was not fashionable to be Jewish. Um, but that was just, her interest just brought her away from that. I don't know if she hated it or anything, but my family wasn't, at least, I mean, I've got some aunts and uncles that are, but my family was not religious at all. I mean, it wasn't that she denounced Judaism and went to Christianity. It was just, they just weren't very religious. And if they were going to make reference to some religion, it was more Christian. I also am not very religious. My dad has always been an atheist and believed in science. Although he has been told by a pastor that he was one of the most spiritual people he's ever met. Um, it's interesting what is spiritual and all that, but I did, however, go to a Catholic school for 2 years, and that was horrible. Not sure why my parents sent me there. I think it was because of the bad kid thing. I got into even more trouble. I think that just was a challenge for me to see how much more trouble I could get into. But I didn't like it, and it wasn't cool. We got made fun of by the public school kids. And I told my mom I wanted to go back to public school, and she said, "Okay, fine." Send me back to public school. In third grade. On my dad's side, my mom's side, I would say my mom's family is small, and there were no kids on that side of the family, really. Maybe like second cousins or something, but we never really hung out with them. So I remember just, getting together with family, it being somewhat boring. I was really little. I spent a lot of time with my aunt and everything. But as far as like family get-togethers and things. It was pretty dry and boring. I was the only kid, and I was, of course, the center of attention, but also the center of getting yelled at by everyone about everything, and probably trying to get attention from everyone that just wanted to have adult conversations. Um, my dad's side of the family, my dad has 12, my dad has 10 brothers and 2 sisters, and they all have kids. So, huge family. And their kids are having kids now. And their kids are having kids. So, huge family. I don't even know all of them. My dad is a bluegrass musician, and many of the aunts and uncles and cousins were also bluegrass or folk or gospel musicians. And every family party was about playing music, and I never was a part of that. This was before I started playing music. But I got dragged around to a million different shows and gigs with my dad. Spent a lot of time in bars during that time, and a lot of my aunts and uncles and cousins were very religious, born again Christian, as they say, as they're called. And they were very strict with their kids, but I never paid attention to any of that. I didn't have to answer to any of that really. I just kind of did my own thing. So that, I don't know, I mean, that basically shaped who I was. I mean, I think I was always headed in the direction that I am now. Hopefully, I'm not a cocky little prick anymore, but part of that is just accepting who you are, and you try to compromise and change some things about yourself to make yourself more likable or make your life easier, interaction with other people. But, you know, it's also about just accepting who you are and working with that. But yeah, that's pretty much it on childhood in a nutshell. I started working at this coffee shop, and well, see, now I'm jumping ahead because when I was 21, I got tired of Las Cruces, New Mexico, I guess, and decided I wanted to live in a big city and try to be a rock star and an art star, and do whatever in that vein. And it was, I was gonna have all these opportunities. So anyway, decided to move back to Illinois and lived in Chicago for 10 years, and that was when I sold that first piece. I started working at this cafe in Oak Park, Illinois, which is just outside of Chicago. It's for all intents and purposes, it's a neighborhood of Chicago practically. And they had art up on the walls, and I was like, oh, I think I'd like to hang up some of my favorite pieces on the walls, and actually didn't work there for a while. Moved back home with my mom, and all of a sudden I got a check in the mail for a painting from the cafe, and I was like, oh, cool. So yeah, I mean, I put price tags on it, put it on the wall, and put price tags on them. Put a couple pieces up. So I didn't expect that it would sell right away like that. I'm not really sure. I mean, who's to say? I mean, I definitely wanted to do that. I guess I didn't really have, I didn't really have a way of defining what I was going to do with my art at that point. I mean, I think I was really mostly interested in creating art that I thought was original and unique and um, pushed the envelope and was interesting to look at and something that I thought was cool looking or whatever. So I was kind of pushing that more, just like honing my craft at that point. But having that little taste of making a little bit of money off of it was like it was like $40, I think. But just that little taste of that kind of made me think, huh, maybe I could do art shows and stuff like that. So eventually, later on down the road, I started doing that and started selling more pieces. Um, but I think, I mean, even still, it's like I don't really. I guess I paint what I like to paint. I paint what I would like to see or what I see in my head more so than what I think will sell. I mean, sometimes I have an idea of which pieces I think people will like more, but um, you know, I wouldn't say that I create art just based on selling it. I actually don't really sell that much um original work. I mean, I sell probably two paintings a year. Um I do murals and sign painting and most recently film work, like I said. Um I've incorporated into construction and landscaping as well. Woodworking, custom woodworking. So I kind of have turned it into sort of a job for myself, a sort of freelance job, and graphic design as well. So I've kind of just slowly been incorporating all that kind of stuff into my everyday routine, um, and finally got out of the restaurant industry after about 20 long years of restaurant and retail, random jobs and things. Um, Probably about 10 to 15 pieces. Some years more than others. I would say on average about 10 to 15. I usually have at least two, three, maybe more pieces going on at once. Sometimes they're different uh, disciplines, I guess, or, I mean, like some are sculpture, some are drawings or watercolors, and some are mixed media, some are acrylic paint. I've tried a few times. Um, it's never really been, it's always been such a very personal thing to me, and I think that stems from like an early age, like I said, identifying with myself as an artist and not really having anyone to collaborate with anyway. So it just kind of like became a very personal thing. It's funny that you say that because I was joking last night that this was a collaboration piece. Um, and I realized I was like, hey, we my friend Josh, I was like, we collaborated on this piece. Um, and then I thought about it, and I was like, well, actually, it was a painting that someone gave to me, another artist, and he didn't want, he was just giving it to me as something to paint over. And I think partly out of we I don't know, we kind of had a falling out at the time, and just partly out of anger, I started to just peel away, started to gouge some of the paint off of it, and I thought it looked cool, like there was weird shapes or paper or something like floating down from the sky. And then Josh later on like found it and painted that little guy on there smoking the cigarette. Um, and I realized that actually it was, I hadn't thought of it until just now, that it was actually a collaboration between three artists, because the original artist painted a nice little landscape and I destroyed it, and then Josh added a character to it. No, they always encouraged me. And I don't know. They over time it was like, oh, people have always been telling me my whole life, oh, you should do something with that. You should do something with that. So I guess part of that kind of stuck with me, and I almost felt like I kind of had to, like if I didn't, I would screwing something up or something. Like I didn't, I knew I was going to pursue it in some kind of way. You know, at one point while I was still in high school, my parents were saying, "Oh, you should go into graphic design." And it was like, it was kind of sounded like a stupid thing to me. It was like, well, that's not creative. It's like, that's not cool. That's not fringe art or whatever. But it was a thought, something to do for money. And at the time, it was a big deal. Like the internet was and computers were getting huge, and graphic designers were making $100 an hour at that time. I never actually got into it until much later on for a completely different reason. They always just encouraged me. How, I don't think they really pushed it too hard. Like they didn't, they wanted me to go to college. They wanted me to just be successful and do whatever I wanted to do, as long as it was like, as long as I did something and I was happy. They didn't really care what it was, but yeah, I mean, they encouraged me. They went to my art shows. My mom has bought a few of my paintings, in support of that. People have always given me art supplies at Christmas time and stuff. My mom was actually really encouraging. My mom and my sister, and my dad. He wanted me to be a guitar player, but backstory: I come from a family of bluegrass musicians, and I wanted nothing to do with that because it wasn't punk rock or. But but he encouraged my art, and during the summer when it was when school was out, my mom had me actually go take a college class in ceramics, and offered to. I didn't go to college right away. Um, Out of high school, I just screwed around and partied, and started playing music and kind of doing that. Um, doing the art thing, uh, working in restaurants. But I did when I was 21. I went to school for because I think I sort of had it in my head. I was like, I got art in the bag at this point. It doesn't really, I don't want to go to school for that. Didn't feel like I needed to. Whether or not I did, I'm not sure, but I felt pretty cocky about it. But I did. I thought it would be really cool to just to go to school for guitar performance and just become like a ace guitar player. Um, that only lasted about 6 months, and I was like, forget this. I can't read sheet music, and I can't be like a chamber musician or sight reading musician. So got out of that, but continued to teach myself music and pursue that as a career option as well. Um, I was really the starving artist at that time. Literally, I mean, I wasn't starving because I worked in restaurants, but never had any money, never had a car. Just kind of rolling around on my skateboard, causing trouble. But I dropped out of school at that point, moved back to Chicago again, and just kind of went off on my own, did my own thing, and that was when I started doing art shows and actually playing in bands more, trying to start a band for the longest time. I'm still trying to start a band 16 years later. Started a couple, wasn't what I pictured it would be, but good, just different. Um, but yeah, I mean, that's what I was doing during that point in my life. Um, wrote a lot of songs, painted a lot of paintings. I pick up and let and put down styles. They've all been most things have been kind of ongoing. Sometimes I'll have new ideas that I'll put into effect, but they tend to come and go. Sometimes I'll do one piece in this style, and then I'll do a bunch of pieces in a certain style, and then I won't like that style, so I'll paint over them or something. So some of them get thrown out or changed or improved on, but a lot of them back. I'll pick things back up from the past. I mean, as far as like different styles or a series of a certain concept, I mean, sometimes it'll sometimes I'll put it down for years and I'll want to move on to something else, but then I get drawn back to it somehow. Or I'll add something completely different to it, but still incorporate that back in. Sometimes I put actual paintings down for a year or two, or it'll sometimes take me a year to finish a painting or 2 years, just because I'll work very slowly on it, and sometimes I'll paint three or four other paintings or do other pieces during that time. Some kind of happen more within a month or two. Some some of the simpler, smaller pieces, maybe one day, few hours. Just really depends. I just finished a painting not that long ago, a few weeks ago, month or two. And right about when I was finishing up that one, I might have still been working on it. I started a new piece. Um, and that piece is is one of the styles that I've gone back and forth on a few times. It was kind of something that I came up with when I was in Chicago, and that was about, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago. Um, when that style first emerged, and now and then after a few years, I did another one kind of in that style again, um, a couple, and I really liked them and got a lot of good feedback on it. So I'm kind of working with that at the moment, trying to see where I can go with it. I was in Monticello, way out in the middle of nowhere, no cell service, um, and I was out there herding goats and just generally helping on the farm, doing some construction projects also. I liked it. I liked it. The work didn't bother me at all. I loved the work. I just didn't like the seclusion. It's like it was my first experience in a long time of really being just, I went straight from Chicago to Monticello, and it was really nice, and I needed that break for sure. But towards the end of that, I got pretty antsy, and I needed to make some friends that weren't goats, and do some things, make some connections, see what my next move was going to be. I did finish one piece um while I was there. Um but I was drawing and working on stuff. There wasn't a great, it was pretty rustic. They built their own house out of cob, and all the rooms hadn't even been added yet. There was no bathroom really, not a working bathroom. There was hardly a place to really paint. Painting outside in the desert means getting a painting full of sand, and painting inside with little kids running around means you're going to get your stuff ruined or get your paint splattered all over the place. So I didn't work on a whole lot of that. I actually worked on a collage piece, collage and ink piece, because it was pretty small. It was something that I could kind of just sit in my bed and work on. There actually is. There's at least two or three that are, you know, fine artists, and there's a few craftsmen and women around. There's one artist out there, and this really is the middle of nowhere. I mean, there's a little small community there, but it's very secluded and rustic. Um, there's there's one artist though that has a huge warehouse sized gallery and a huge studio. Really interesting guy. Um, has marble statues and paintings and collages and mixed media and just all kinds of stuff. Fabric art, large installations, and he does big art shows out there every year. But not really anyone my own age out there. It's mostly retirees and a few families. This is a very small town here, but quite a few artists in this little downtown district. Um, for such a small population. I had no idea that was even here. Um, had no idea. I actually had been here before a couple of times. I never really noticed much. It just looked like a really small town to me, which it is. But I didn't notice the galleries and the hot springs much. I did hear something about the hot springs, but I had no idea it was so prevalent here. I thought it was just a big mud pit that people would soak in or something. I had no idea there were so many spas and bathhouses and so many galleries, and it kind of feels like a ghost town sometimes. But there's a pretty tight knit, arts community here with, I mean, again, for the size of the town, pretty happening little scene. Yeah, I mean, I have though. I mean, believe me, I've gone through multiple phases since I've been here where I've been like, I've got to get the hell out of this town and get somewhere where there's something going on, and thought about moving back to Las Cruces, thought about moving to Albuquerque, thought about maybe moving to Santa Fe. Um, but I don't know, something keeps drawing me back in. It's like a new project or a new thing happens that makes a new opportunity comes about that sort of like, oh, maybe I'll stay here. Things are going well. Most recently, it was the movie thing. We were just like, we had no warning even or anything. It was just like we just got this. My girlfriend and I both worked on it. We just got this email saying, "Hey, there's some people looking for crew members for the art department," and we were like, "Oh yeah, whatever. That'll be the day." And we'll see. I'll believe it when I see it. We probably won't get hired or anything. And pretty sure we were the only. They wanted to hire a couple people from this town. They brought in lots of their own people, but they wanted a couple local artists on the art department. They didn't bring any. The production designer and his wife, the set decorator, they brought from Austin, and they hired us. I love the Southwest. I mean, I think I would stay in the Southwest in some form or another. I could see living in Northern California or Central California or something like that, but who can afford that? Um, and it's I mean that's a totally different thing. I think I kind of like that I'm out in the middle of nowhere here. It's sort of the Wild West out here. There's not a whole lot of there's just not a people just don't. mess with you too much here. There's no, it's not quite as much order. It's not as regulated. It's not, it's, no one's really breathing down your neck. It's very laid back atmosphere. A lot of people don't have jobs. A lot of retirees, a lot of semi-retired or people, living off of government. There's not a huge workforce here. There's not a lot of money being made here. It's actually one of the poorest counties, I think, in the US. One of. I think it might even be in the top 10 poorest counties. I'm pretty sure it's the poorest county in New Mexico, if not second, first or second poorest counties. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you're not self motivated, there's nothing going on here. That's for sure. There's a few restaurant and hospitality jobs floating around town, but construction, if you have the skills. I think it's sort of morphed into I'd like to keep roots here, but maybe do some more traveling for work and possibly even spending months at a time somewhere else. Um, but like I said, keeping roots here, um, which basically I'll have anyway because my sister lives here. Generally speaking, and my girlfriend's parents live here too, so I don't know, we both kind of have roots here anyway. But we've thought about traveling a bit, maybe taking some jobs up in Albuquerque or in Texas or wherever. I mean, who knows? It might have been a totally different path in life. Um, I guess my way of looking at that is that you can't really question it, and that whatever decision you make, whatever decisions you make in life, it's like you make the best of it, and you can always make more decisions later on. You can change your decisions. um, I mean, there were times where I was like, man, I wish I would have stayed in school. At the time, it was really difficult to stay in. At that point, there was just it was just a logistics thing. I had the chance to go back a couple times. I actually, it's the only other education I had was I took a course, a graphic design course on how to use this program that I had, an intensive training course. And then I was actually considering going to Columbia right before I moved here. It was either go to Columbia College in Chicago or herd goats. So I chose goats. Um, but I mean, here I am, and I've had tons of wonderful opportunities and tons of opportunities to educate myself and learn new skills and take on new challenges. So, you know, college is not for everyone, obviously. But also, not going to college doesn't have to mean that you have to work a poor job or be poor, or it doesn't have to mean you can't be educated. It's what you make of it. So I don't regret it. No. No, I'm glad for the experience, and it was fun, and I have always been a despite testing extremely high, which put me into difficult classes when I was in high school and even before high school. Um, I never really was a great student, though. I never did homework, and I didn't get really good grades. But when I did go to college for that short stint, I was pretty much a straight A student and got involved in extracurricular activities. And I don't know, I guess, proved to myself that I could be a good student. So that was that was a positive experience, and I learned quite a bit about music during that time. It gave me a limited but good foundation, um, on which to grow as a musician and learned how to teach myself. So it was a good experience. Sometimes I get ideas for concepts and I try to follow a certain concept. Um, but usually I try to think, of subject matter. Sometimes it would be something as simple as a tree or a buffalo. Sometimes it's just a certain mood I'm trying to capture. Sometimes it's just kind of a shape or a vision or a image I see in my head. And then I kind of just start bringing that out on the canvas. Um, a lot of times these days, I sort of creating the background for a piece. Um, Usually, sometimes it'll entail using taking an old piece of artwork that I don't like or that I didn't paint. I just acquired for the use of painting on, and I'll maybe splatter even some more paint on top of that, and then sand it all off and use those layers as sort of my background. I may add discernible images to the background later, but I sort of use that as my texture, and that's almost like creating a whole nother like sort of abstract piece in which to put something more illustrative on top of. But as far as from a more conceptual standpoint, I mean, I hardly ever say, "Oh, I want to do a painting about blank." In other words, I hardly ever say, "Oh, I'm going to do a painting about politics or war or pollution or love or." I usually it usually stems from more of a subconscious vision or just sometimes it's just an object that inspired by or I like the way it looks. Again, the tree example. Um, and then later on, sometimes during, sometimes after the piece is finished, it kind of speaks to me and creates a mood and and takes on a meaning. And only then do I title the piece or whatever. But I mean, it's so open to interpretation, all of that world, because when people come into the gallery and look at my work, a lot of times they ask me what does it mean or what is it about or what are you trying to say here. Sometimes they have their own idea of what it means right off the bat and they make assumptions. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they have no idea. Sometimes they don't care. But a lot of times I honestly just make things up at that point. But sometimes but mostly what I do though is like I said, I think about what the painting says to me, and that's what I tell them. Sometimes they don't like what I say because it didn't line up with what they said, and they're like, "Oh, uh, yeah," you know. And typically I don't. I try not to let people think something that is not what I intended, but at the same time, I sort of, I try not to really say anything, I just, yeah, like, I mean, if they like it, they like it. And 9 times out of 10, people don't really even ask me, even if they buy a piece. Sometimes they'll ask me after they bought it, what does it mean? Or, I've had one collector, ask me to just write a small little blip about what the painting meant to me or whatever. I mean, they didn't care what I said, just something about the series or something about the concept, so they could slip it into the back of the frame just as just part of the remembrance of the piece or something. But sometimes people will just buy a piece and they won't even ask any questions and just walk out with it. Sometimes they don't want to know what the artist thinks about it, or they'll say, "No, I don't." I want people to experience art in their own way. I don't necessarily want to dictate how they experience it, and I may not even understand how someone experiences or appreciates art. Everybody. I think some people look really deep into it, and others just like the way it looks, or maybe they don't even know what looks good, and they just like they're drawn to it, and it looks like something that might look nice in their house, or their friends might like to see art on the walls or something. What do you mean exactly? Um, you know, I have a hard time with that because I feel like it's extremely difficult to define what is art. It's all art is found materials, but you're manipulating them and rearranging them in such a way that you're creating something new out of it. So I don't think I consider that art. It may be a statement of some kind or a decoration. I don't consider that art. If anything, the person who designed the suit or wove it, I mean, it was probably woven on a machine, but that's the artist in that situation. That's my personal opinion. I've heard people define what is art, in a lot of different ways, but yeah, I don't know that it's so much of an odd definition, but maybe one that I don't agree with. Um, that art is defined as something you create for the sole purpose of its aesthetic value. It serves no other purpose. It has no function, only form. And I have a hard time with that because I think that it's hard to draw that line there, Like, I mean, so if a person designs a car, is that person then not an artist? Or is just the design the art and the car is not a piece of art because it is just a manufactured version of what that is? But sometimes art is manufactured. People make prints, people hire people to create their artwork for them or install their artwork or to help work on it. Um, is building a house a form of art? What if it's a house that looks very artsy? I mean, I just I don't know. I don't agree with that definition. I think I have a broader in that respect. I think I have a broader definition of art. But hanging a suit jacket on the wall, not art. Taking a suit jacket and painting it orange and hanging it on the wall, eh, maybe art. I mean, what defines it as art? Whether it's good or not? I mean, that's open to interpretation as well. I mean, I think it's important to keep an open mind. And I think that once you decide on a definition, you may already be limiting the definition. I mean, yeah. Yeah, I mean, yeah, definitely. But, I mean, I think it's more of like I said, it means something different to everyone. People interpret it in a different way. I may not even be able to fathom how you experience art, I may not I mean, you may try to describe to me your description of how you value art or how you look at art or what you think about when you look at it, or that you have no reaction to it whatsoever. And I may try to understand what you're saying, but my concept of art maybe such a different thing that I we're not even thinking on the same level, And we don't need to necessarily. I think some people will tend to agree on things, and some people won't. But I don't think it's worthwhile to form one defining, you know, description of what is art. I think it's all in the chase. It's all in it's all in the process of trying to understand what art is, or even just what it is to you. So to just slap a label on it and say, well, that's it, we can shove that in that corner now. Yeah, I feel like that's limiting, and it's no fun. I've tried to define art. I wrote a one of my artist bios for a show that I did was sort of based on that. It was what is art, and I went on this sort of big long paragraph of not necessarily that I was defining art, like I said, slapping a label on it, but I was sort of asking questions, and of, here's all the possibilities of what art could be defined as, and this is what it means to me, and that's it. I think maybe as a joke at the end of the bio, I might have written "by my art" period on that one. I'm guessing that half the people that read it didn't even notice. They just read right through that part and was like, "Huh? Oh, whatever." I don't think people really. I think most people don't think too deeply into things, especially when they're reading something. But some people do. Some people overanalyze things, I'm sure, but I don't think some people even. I don't think all the sentences even register into their brain sometimes. I mean, everyone must have felt that way at some point. Like if you've ever read a whole page of a book and then had to go back and reread it because you don't even remember what happened because you were just kind of sounding out the words in your head and not and thinking about something else. I mean, a job is a job. Anyone can get a job, but it's really a job I like doing. I'm creating, I'm building, I'm designing, uh, I think I think of each set as kind of a sculpture in a way. You're creating this facade. Oh man, um, it's a broad place to start. Um, uh, I don't know. What are my opinions on politics in general? I don't even know what to say. I mean, it's all such a joke. It hardly feels even real. I can't believe. I mean, I can believe, but I just can't believe things are going the way they're going. It doesn't feel real. Like I almost feel like it's a big scam or something. Like they knew all along who was going to be president. Like it's all part of the plan. Some kind of conspiracy. It's been going on for a long time. And this is just how it's manifesting itself right now. But yeah, I mean, people, I don't know. People are pissed. People are pissed off. People are confused, scared, pissed, all that. I think a lot of people felt the same way when we went into the Iraq war the second time, the second Iraq war, whatever it was. What was it called again? Shock and awe. I don't know. I mean, like, I think at that point I kind of felt the same way. Maybe even at this point I'm almost kind of desensitized. Like I'm just like, yeah, yeah, whatever. I don't fucking care. But um, I was surprised about the results of the election, but or I thought I was, and then I was like, oh yeah, well, I already knew that the popular vote doesn't mean anything, and just whoever they feel like putting into the presidency. Got to turn my ringer off. I don't know. Be pretty scary if we go to war. Be pretty scary if all these progressive laws are reversed. Or I don't know. I don't know what to think. Even the experts are all saying like, we don't really know what's gonna happen. We'll just have to wait and see. It's like, well, what the fuck does that mean? Are we gonna be? Are we going to war? Are we changing our form of government into something even more fascist and imperialist? I don't know. Depends on who you talk to. But I mean, statistically, county voted for Trump, or in general, just always votes Republican. New Mexico, as a state, did not vote Republican in this election. So in this area, yeah, I mean, it's mostly Republican. Uh, but I mean, if you only talk to people in certain circles, you might hear the opposite, or you might think the opposite, just because if you spend a lot of time downtown, maybe it's more liberal business owners or something, and I guess the general consensus of people that I talk to is, anti-Trump, um, but the general population here is pro-Trump in this county. Um, I'm not sure that even all of the Republicans are on board with it. In fact, I'm positive that some are starting to question the situation. Um, I think a lot of people don't know what to do when politics when things having to do with politics don't go their way. It's like, well, what do we do? People are scared. Um, I think that's great. I think people need to be politically active. Sometimes I wish I were more active, but I think some people gravitate towards that, and it's like, I think people gravitate towards things because they have an interest in it, or they identify with it, or they just feel they need to, and they're maybe good at it, and they know a lot about it, and I think it's good that there's activists out there. Sometimes I'm not entirely sure I understand what some of these groups are trying to do or say. Um, I mean, something like Occupy. I mean, it sounds like all things that I'm behind. I mean, basically they're saying that you know the 1% owns all the money and controls everything, and everyone else is just basically subject to that, or in many cases, the sort of consumeristic slavery of people. So yeah, I believe in that. I mean, do I think organizing an event downtown and pissing off all the cops is gonna do anything politically? I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm not sure. I think, maybe at some extent it raises awareness and gets people to rally together, which is good. It sends a message. It shows people that they're not alone in their thoughts and beliefs, but I think it's a great idea. I just don't know that it's an effective solution. The Tea Party, isn't that like the Republican thing? I don't know. To be honest, I don't know much about it except now that I'm learning from the other perspective that the whole point of that was that they didn't like the way things were going while Obama was in office. So they banded together to, I don't know, whatever, fight for what is right or whatever. I don't know. It's in my mind, it's a bunch of BS. It's like they're not fighting the same fight. It's like, and it's like liberals like tend to have this belief that Republicans are oppressing us, but then when you ask from the other side, the Republicans are saying, "Oh, the Democrats are oppressing us." It's like it depends on who you talk to, I guess, but I don't know that I would label myself Democrat or Republican, but I do think they're fighting two different fights. Like I do think that the Republican idealism is uneducated, short-sighted, and sheepish. I mean, to some degree, people like that are going to flock to all different political stances, but um, I think it's almost just like, oh, well, I'm Republican and my family is Republican and my friends are Republicans, so I'm Republican. And I think the same is true of Democrats, but I mean, I think that the Democrats are fighting for is more like something real and substantial and well thought out and I mean, there's some point to it. Whereas like the Republican ideals is it just seems kind of based on like religion and racism and sexism and profit and imperialism. And they're just it's just not the same kind of ideals, I guess. But like I said, I mean, I don't know that I consider myself Democrat or Republican. Um, Definitely something maybe closer to Democrat than Republican, but no, I haven't heard of that. But it kind of reminds me of like when we were, in the midst of the Iraq War. It's kind of like this instinct of some Americans to say, "Well, oh well, I'm not a part of that. I don't believe in war. Like, don't include me in that group of like Bush supporters and war supporters and anti-Muslim terrorists, this, and that." And I mean, I think a lot of people have been guilty of that. I mean, I think I've definitely been in a cab with Middle Eastern fella, making sure I, you know, gave my stance on the war or whatever. But you know, I don't think that we really have a choice anymore. I don't think we know Trump didn't get the popular vote, so do we really have a choice in who becomes president? I don't know. Do we have a choice in what the president's actions are? We can protest, 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 and we can stand up and fight, but anybody that really stands up and fights just gets beaten down, arrested, assassinated, or written off as a crazy person, or you know, I don't know. The electoral college is outdated and flawed. I mean, in my opinion, we count the votes and whoever wins wins. I mean, you don't. Well, yeah, but but we're gonna just have to. Yeah, I don't know. I did. Yeah. Oh, I didn't. I don't know. I don't really want to say who I voted for, but I will say it wasn't Trump and it wasn't Hillary. Those are the only clues I'm giving. And actually, you know what? I probably would have voted for Hillary if I thought that New Mexico was going to risk going Republican with their vote. But I pretty much knew New Mexico was going to vote Democrat anyway, so I just voted who I wanted to vote for. Yeah. And actually New Mexico had an extremely high third party vote this time, which is impressive. I mean, I don't know that I'm really on board with that third party or not, but um it sets a precedent, you know, it shows an example of the possibility of a third party, which I think needs to happen. I think it's an important that we get out of this bipartisanism, but they're gonna try not to let that happen. I mean, the co-conspirators, I'll call them. Um, Politics. This piece is titled "Politics" by Reed. Um, and I I like to say I don't get into politics. I it bores me, pisses me off. Um, I think I can't get into it because I don't believe in it to begin with. It's like, well, what are your politics like? I don't have any. Um I would say I'm anti-violence, but I would say my politics swing more towards anarchy and socialism. Maybe I don't know. Uh, I guess I'm against capitalism. I'm against corporate oppression. Um, I don't know. I don't believe in owning property or land. I think that to quantify that is ridiculous. Um, you know, and all people are people, and all people in different regions all live. Life works for them differently. It's pretty hard to have laws that govern widespread areas of land because what works for people in one community may not work for people in another community. Um, what works for one person may not work for another person. Um, I think I think local government should be much more powerful. Federal government much less powerful. I basically have, you know, pipe dreams, political pipe dreams. But you know, I mean, at the same time, we all need to make a dollar because we need to pay the bills and eat food and have shelter and have cars to get around with. So we all buy into the system, um, and we all tend to govern our lives based on that system. There's there's no way around it, really. I mean, you can move out to the woods and build your own shack somewhere, I'm sure. But if you want to be part of society, you have to buy into the system or work into the system, act into the system. So, what's the solution? You know, voting against Trump or voting against Hillary or voting against Obama or voting. I mean, they're all, I was saying before that Republicans say that the Democrats are oppressing them, and the Democrats say the Republicans are oppressing them, and they're all the oppressors. I mean, they're all politicians. They all have money. They're all in bed with some level of capitalism or lobbying that's related to capitalism. Um, Most voters, it's like on one hand, the electoral college seems like it would make sense because most people are uneducated. Most people don't know anything, and they're sheep. They'll vote for whoever their friends vote for. But, I don't know. I give people a little more credit than that. I give the people more credit than the electoral college. Let's put it that way. If everything was unanimous, the world would be. If everything was based on a unanimous vote, all decision making, law making, policy making, and politician appointing, it would be a totally different world, completely different world. We want to go around the world and turn everything into capitalism. And for what? It's all business. It's all based on money now. Nobody does anything for what's right. Probably hasn't in a long time. To be involved in politics and war means to pretty much, compromise all of your ideals and cast those aside and do what's going to keep you elected or get you elected or keep the public opinion up or down. Trump just seems like he's doing whatever the hell he wants, and whether it pisses people off or not, but that could just be an act, I mean, that could just be a load of crap too. Could just be, I mean, like I said, if all lawmaking was done based on a unanimous vote, it'd be a different world. Um, there's there's been a small group of people running everything for a long time. It's nothing new. We just have to kind of hope that they're not too evil. And it's kind of looking like pretty evil nowadays. But I I read used to read a lot of books by Daniel Quinn. He wrote a book called Ishmael, which is probably the most well known one. It's part of a series, and I like his philosophy on his style of government and more of a style of economy, but he calls it tribalism. And, basically it's based on tribalism because, and the difference between tribalism and the mother culture, as he calls it, is that, yeah, sure, tribes would fight each other and battle each other and fight for territory, but they never actually imperialized. They never actually committed genocide or slavery or you know waged war on a grand scale. That was a different culture, and these are his words. And also, they pretty much bounced off of each other like animals would. An animal doesn't go and kill all the other foxes or take over their land. They jockey for land, but and the other aspect of that is is the tribal economy, and it basically states that one example he used was a carnival. He said that some businesses do practice tribal style of business, and the difference is everyone has their job and everyone gets paid, but the manager or the owner, that's just his job, is to be the manager, the owner. He doesn't necessarily make more money. Um, Maybe the food vendor doesn't really make that much money, but for instance, the trapeze artists maybe make the most money because they're the most skilled performers. They have the most dangerous job. They work the hardest, and they're the biggest act in the carnival, in the circus, carnival, whatever you want to call it. And he encouraged people to not to have a violent uprising where we overthrow the government and the shit still floats to the top afterward, but that you change culture by how you live your life and how you conduct business and how he encouraged people to write books, draw pictures, play songs, sing songs, be a newspaper reporter, be on TV, or just be whatever you are, but live your life based on those ideals. And not to try to control people or try to control everything. I mean, like I said, what works for you might not work for someone else. Um, and that, the best way to change things is to change them. Just change them about yourself. Influence the people around you. Tell people what you think. Tell people your opinions. And hold true to them, and people will catch on. It's how this mother culture, as he calls it, came to be the way it is. People were influenced by propaganda and tactics like depriving people of food, which is, obviously not a way that we can change things now, not a way that people should change things, but also it was whispered into the ear of everyone around. So, and that's how things change or come to be the way they are. It's it's the culture around you whispering into your ear your whole life that shapes who you are. It shapes your opinions on the world. And so if we keep whispering good things into each other's ears, those people might whisper those things into their children's ears or to their friends' ears or other people's children's ears, or they may write a book that inspires people. They may own a convenience store and they conduct business in such a way that inspires people. So I think that's what we need to remember, and we need to try not to get caught up in what's going on around you, but to just live your life based on the ideals that you would like to see other people live by. And that's it. That's my thing. I think I would just like to say that I would like to influence everyone to live based on love. I don't expect everyone to fall in love with everyone they see on the street or to love them like they were a brother, but to talk to people, interact with people based on love. Love yourself and treat people as you would someone you love. And I guarantee that it'll come back to you tenfold and it'll change everything around you. It's amazing what you can do in one day if you put your mind to it and just make it a point to raise everyone's spirits. It's amazing what you can accomplish with that. So with that, I say mahalo.
Creatures of the night, they won't save me. Wake up to light. It was all a wasted dream. But I am more than I have let you see. I am the sky. I am the sky. I am the sky. Inside the mind. thoughtful mind is always wandering. Through a child's eyes, everything seems so promising. Such bright feeling, such great aspirations for the future lie before you. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time. It's a waste of time inside the mind. To me to comfort me, to make me see the color of free. But I am more than human, deeper than material things. I am the sky. I am the sky. I am the sky inside the mind.